Hey, we want to get you caught up to speed on where we are in our series, Folly of Kings, and then where we want you to focus the discussion for today, Sunday, October 11, or maybe the week of this Sunday. We are looking at the kings of Israel, and we're considering just the really significant, over-the-top, grandiose ways in which they failed, where there was so much that they were doing that was anti everything that God had called them to do as the kings of Israel. And yet we see God's faithfulness continue in the midst of their unfaithfulness. Today we're going to look at King Manasseh. King Manasseh reigned for 55 years in Judah. He was the longest tenured king in all of Israel's history. But Manasseh was also deemed to be maybe the worst, most evil king in all of Israel's history. There were things that he instituted, including child sacrifices. He sacrificed his own sons on the altar of Moloch. He also instituted really extreme, erotic, just deplorable sexual worship in the temple of God. And so you have this evil king who did evil things for many decades. And then God brings Assyria in to bring him into captivity. And then he cries out to God for mercy after decades of this evil. Now imagine a scenario where somebody like Osama bin Laden, somebody like Saddam Hussein, somebody like Stalin, somebody like Hitler, on the other side of all of the evil that they perpetrated. Could you imagine a scenario where they then became restored to their rightful position in their minds, and that they would be then seen as somebody who was trustworthy, that God would somehow restore them in that way? Well, that's exactly what happened to Manasseh. God restored him and put him back in his position as the king of Judah for many years on the other side of that. We see God's irrational mercy being poured out in the life of Manasseh. And so on the one hand, we see this just incredible example of how God has showcased time and again that no one is beyond his reach. That no matter what it is that we do, no matter what evil we participate in, that forgiveness is accessible to us, and that God wants to bring restoration no matter how awful things may be. But there's another piece of the story of Manasseh that I want to focus on, and that is that we tend to be formulaic with God. We tend to approach God with, if I raise my kids right, then this is how it's going to happen. If I go to church and I do these things that are deemed to be faithful, that God's going to provide for me in certain specific ways. We look at it from a politics perspective and we say, here's the way that God wants certain things to happen politically. And we put God into a formula and we assume that we understand the formula. Well, as we look at the story of Manasseh and we look at what happened just prior to his reign and what happened with Hezekiah, and then we look at what happens over the course of basically a 200-year time frame in Judah, we come to discover that God may very well have a formula, but we don't understand it. And that when we try to force God into a formula that fits into our perspective, that we become disillusioned, we become disappointed, and oftentimes we find ourselves wavering in our faith. So we serve a God who is greater than whatever formulas we want to try to create for him. He works outside of those formulas, and he is always working for redemption. He's always working for our good and for his glory. And we want to kind of deconstruct that formulaic idea of God and think a little bit more about who he is in the midst of whatever is going on, and recognize that no matter what we face, he's greater than. He is greater than all of those struggles, all of our unmet expectations, all of our disappointments. He's greater than those things. And so we want to grapple with that. We want to think about the incredible mercy and grace of God that's been given. We also want to wrestle with this idea of where and how have we put God into a formula, and then we've allowed our faith to waver because he did not meet our expectations. I hope this time is enjoyable for you. I'm going to ask you to grapple with a few questions. Where have we been disappointed by God because he didn't meet our expectations? But I also want you to think along the lines of, who is it that we assume is beyond the reach of God? Who is it that we've kind of written off and said, there's no way that this person can turn to Christ? And then maybe thirdly, who is it that we're withholding forgiveness from because we assume that they've just gone too far, that they've just violated too much, that we're unwilling to forgive? See, our God is greater than all of that. He's proven that, and the life of Manasseh is a powerful, provocative, dare I say, controversial example of the greatness of our God that transcends our perspective on forgiveness, our perspective on who it is that's been forgotten, and the formulas that we try to pigeonhole him into. I hope your time together is an encouragement. God bless you. We love you, SBC.